What's up, guys? This is Ray. So today is the 7th of March 2017, and this isn't necessarily anything geared specifically. I'm just having a really good intuitive day with ideas. So I felt, as I was kind of brainstorming something out, I would just kind of make a video about it. Because it would be a subject of interest to at least some of my friends that have been on my Facebook that have seen me post some of the inserts that I get from the manuscripts of the older books that I read with like mythology and folklore and ancient occult science books and stuff. So I was not too long ago reading some demonology and books that specifically have associations with Lilith, the archetype of Lilith or the mythology. So it was my Origin of Lilith notes, and I referenced it from a book called The Book of Adam and Eve and Satan, as well as the Myth Legends of Babylonia and Demonology and Devil Lore. So I'm going to kind of explain some astrological symbolism and where the origin of it comes from with folklore and like mythology. So obviously Black Moon Lilith is associated with the archetype or the mythological character of Lilith, which was Adam's first wife during the time of creation in Eden. Because the reason why a lot of feminist groups more or less try to embody or look at Lilith as a role model, and I would say I guess third wave people or whatever, is because she defied Adam. And essentially the whole story goes is that, that Adam was created, but man is not meant to be by himself or live alone. So the entire purpose and existence of a woman is to make sure that Adam's not alone, make sure that man's not alone, because he shouldn't be to himself, insinuating that he's not trustworthy is what I gathered from that. And also the whole birthing factor. So because she more or less resembles a lot of like the Aries kind of archetype, masculine, domineering, independent, that sort of thing. So she wasn't casted away. She essentially, in the Babylonian folklore, she produced some sort of spell to cast her out of Eden. So Eden was like, the country club status, where it had everything. And then she went out in like the boonies, and was just living, like a rogue sort of thing. But anyway, that's kind of a backstory of some of the mythology. So me being into, essentially I was kind of more into postmodern Satanism, and I got into a lot of the darker things, because I'm a Plutonian, so naturally. But I used to project, obviously, my strong Saturn signature that's on my descendant, so on my angles, by projecting that through, like, modern Satanism ideology, which is, being your own self and also controlling and taking responsibility for yourself, that kind of thing. So it's like a sociological, religious kind of philosophy. If you were going to embody the Saturnian kind of archetype, but specifically, I'm going to highlight in ancient astrology, Saturn is not only associated with being a malefic, which that's a very not touchy subject, but I guess an inspiring debated kind of topic, because most modern astrologers or people today don't like to associate the malefic thing. So I'm going to explain how it's still malefic and why their interpretation of it being malefic doesn't necessarily mean that it's superstition, like that it's going to put a hex on you or cause death or demonic possession or anything like that. So Saturn is attributed to Saturday. Saturday is the 6th day of the week, and if you look back to the the storyline with God and Adam and Eve and Lilith, that there's 7 days of creation, right? Lilith and Adam divorce, and the second Eve is created from his rib to eliminate authority issues, as were the devils and the demons created. Demons were the last of the 6 days' creations, created so late in the day that there was no light to fashion them bodies. The Creator promised them bodies the next day, The Creator then told the devils he must rest on the Sabbath, and that the demons must disperse and find their own bodies. Motive of demons thereafter is to seek out carnal enjoyments by nestling in the hearts of men to indulge in their pleasures, passions, and senses. Devils were ether spirits with negative atmospheric forms caused by envy, resentment, of man, and his gift of the flesh. As long as man and woman remain pure, this is where you don't give into temptation thing, remain pure, the ether spirits were unable to take possession of man's body, so the devil sought to corrupt the humans. So essentially I was trying to reference just the 6th day of creation. So essentially the Creator or God or whatever was in the midst of, creating the ether spirits. And he obviously used the daylight to create life. That's supposed to be a symbology for, the actual sun. From earlier religions and civilizations that worship the sun, like ancient Egyptians and Babylonians and the pagans and stuff like that. So, if you even know anything about Egyptian theology, Saturn is associated with Osiris, which is supposed to be a facet of the sun, the Ra, Atum Ra, but when it's in the tomb, basically when it's dead, because they believe that when the sun would set every day, that the night and the sun would essentially go at heads with each other, and basically have to conquer over the night and wage war all night. And then as the sun rose again, it was affirmation that Horus or Ra or whatever won the battle yet again. So think of that. Saturn's supposed to be the dark side, more or less. Saturn, obviously directly associated with Satan, associated with the 6th day. So the 6th day of creation was the day that the devils and demons were made. So the ether spirits, it later translated to not just devils, not just demons, but devils, the word devil. And then as it continued to be translated throughout time and the gossip phenomenon of butchering the translations, it's turned into that the devil was one individual entity that took on some sort of character. And he just took on the facet of all the ether spirits. So that's actually why Saturn is associated with Satan, because of the 6th day of the week, and because of the association with darkness. So then you wonder why that symbology was then used in medieval astrology. Saturn being malefic is supposed to, we all know this, even people who won't admit that Saturn's a malefic or say that when you ask them to explain what Saturn represents, they say, well, restriction, inhibiting things, or, delays. And I'm like, yeah, okay. So think of that from a personal perspective. If you were restricted, like perhaps maybe locked up in something, or limited by things that you need. Think of limited by food, limited by air. I know those are drastic examples, but I'm trying to make a point here. And then delays. Who wants to wait for certain things? You know what I mean? Especially if you feel like karmatically you deserved it. So anything that was taking or manifesting energy that seems like it was taking something from people, they would look at that as a negative thing because it's you losing something. Loss. Saturn is also associated with loss. And the benefics, essentially, if you don't believe in that, the Venus and Jupiter is supposed to be giving. So Venus is supposed to give bonds or, give love to people. And Jupiter is supposed to give good fortune. But Mars and Saturn take away. Mars takes away your vitality as you continue to press on. It may be a motivational factor, but it does take away your life force in order for you to use Mars energy. And Saturn takes away things in your life. It's also designated for like the major chapters of your life. So when you think of back to like the demons, the devils, they were never given bodies. So their entire MO from that moment forth was any of the descendants of Adam and Eve. They wanted to corrupt them so then they could take their bodies. Do you see what I'm saying? Okay? So, now we think of it this way. When Saturn is in a natal chart in particular, it takes away the abundance of what that house represents. So if you had Saturn in the second house, it would take away your sense of self-worth and self-esteem and your potential fortunate connections with other people and bonding relationships. It would take away your happiness with having fulfilled relationships. Same kind of phenomenon would happen in the 7th house as well. And I say that specifically too because the houses that are correlated with the same planets do have similarities with that. So if you think of it from a developmental standpoint, when Saturn is in a birth chart, I'll choose mine as an example just to make it easier so I don't confuse myself. In the 7th house, it takes obviously 30 years for it to go exactly back to where it was. So for every quarter of the dial, meaning every 90 degrees, Saturn has a square to its square or opposition or whatever to its natal place. Those are significant life cycle development chapters in your life. So obviously you're born where it is in your chart. Then 7 years later, which is part of your psychological development, it's squared away from your natal placement. Then when you hit puberty or your rebelling phase, it's opposition with where your Saturn was. That's you rebelling against the traditional status quo or the standard, which is Saturn. And that's also symbolized by kids when they're teenagers rebelling against the authority, rebelling against their parent, because Saturn not only represents authority and like a parental figure and someone to aspire to or look up to, but it does in a microcosmic symbology represent the father in this case. And then as you are going to the waxing square to your natal Saturn, so it's gone further obviously than the opposition. You're going to be 21, and then the next time that it goes up and it conjuncts your natal Saturn, you're going to be going through your Saturn return. Okay? So when you take your psychological development into play, it's already been proven many times, and this is an accepted theory, that the first 7 years of a person's life is very, very crucial to their development for the rest of their lives. It sets up their cognitive capacities, their emotional empathy, and their stability, and their ability to just be constructive in general. When Saturn is in, again, so it was in my 7th house when I was born. It is about 2.5 years with each house. So it takes 2.5 years for Saturn to go through each house. So by the time I'm 7, which is, when it's squaring, Saturn being associated with the dark, or, the underworld, or even the devils that will tempt you, or negative kind of associations that would take things away. Saturn in those crucial times when it's going to be going to its first square, those houses are going to represent where you've been neglected in your development. The symptoms of that neglect of the development will manifest in the polarity house. So, for example, it being in the 7th house, which is my natal, the things that are established with the 7th and the 1st house is identity of self and identity, disassociation with others. So you understand that you're I, me, and they're them, sort of thing. Me having a sun squaring Neptune just reinforces this formula, or my theory, that I had obviously an issue with either my own personal identity or feeling that I could define my own self. Which, again, is just reinforced yet again, because in the polarity, because obviously Saturn is, the 7th, the polarity I have Chiron there. So, and that's supposed to be some sort of inhibiting of the self, which is exactly what I was talking about. The symptom would apply. Then, when Saturn went into the 8th house, that would be the way that I relate to other people, and my bonds, and trusting people, and developing my own self-worth, and having mutual respect for other people. Okay? So, having Saturn over that, pretty much, like in a real-life scenario, what that would constitute is that I wasn't nurtured properly as a child. Which is evident. So these symptoms will manifest as me having some sort of self-esteem issues or emotional imbalances or having dysfunctional relationships, either platonic or intimate, with people in my life, which is a symptom that I'm aware of. And then Saturn going into the 9th house would have to do things with the beliefs, with your beliefs, your opinions, your ideas, and just your cognitive process. And your capacity to excel to different subject matter and knowledge and everything, which I've definitely struggled throughout my entire life with school. And the fact that I struggled to make neurological connections, develop my mental cognitive processes, is evident in the polarity, which is my communication house, the 3rd house, where I had issues articulating myself, and I still talk about that to this day. And it's been definitely a work in progress. And as I've actually remedied, because the origin of it is me being neglected with the 9th house. The remedy that's actually wasn't even intentional, that has helped me resolve this issue, was to focus on not necessarily putting myself in a school or a class, because those sorts of things, because I was neglected with my cognitive development, are just going to inhibit me more. And because of the Chiron in my 1st house, I'm going to feel a little bit uncomfortable or insecure with trying to keep up with everyone, because my disassociation with I, me, mine, and them is apparent. So me doing an individual kind of education thing, aka me just acquiring a ton of books and reading them and getting really into it. The more books I read, the better I can articulate myself. So the more I educate myself, the more I become more informed about things, the better my communication skills have been getting. So you see what I'm saying? You need to, where Saturn is for the first 7 years, is the shadow casted. And that's where the demons are sucking things out of you, or where Saturn's sucking things out of you. And as you can tell, although I don't remember those times, and it's not traumatizing for me, more or less, I'm not grieving or crying about it, it has stunted my development and made me struggle with lifelong challenges because of this. And also, if you think too, I have a water Mercury, which that's supposed to be your mind, right? Since I have a water Mercury, that means water Mercury signs have a tendency to be a little late on cognitive development, meaning that they're basically put into the kind of generalized methods for teaching, and they're taught to more or less use brainstorming and stuff, and that would be obviously something for air signs being in Mercury, or even earth signs. But water signs are they have a higher emotional intelligence, and they learn through feeling. Putting somebody in a classroom and sitting at a desk and then not engaging any kind of emotion in with them when they're learning something is going to cause them to either be disinterested or not absorb anything at all, or even not get it. So water Mercury signs usually develop their cognition later in life through their own experiences. So the fact that I had a water Mercury would be delayed, Saturn doing that transit over there reinforces that. So this is just an example. This is also how I do a lot of my my interpretations and my readings. I have been thoroughly studying medieval associations, not just with astrology, but all over the place with folklore and mythology. And understanding how the mythological creatures or characters that are attributed to the planets, how their archetype is manifested into the behavior of the planet. And it's not just that, but the things that I know that are, quote unquote, the standards or something people agree on in the astrological community as being a universal law, which I can't stand that kind of thing. But, just stereotypical, foolproof, more or less, I guess, associations that you can use. I've combined modern astrology associations, partial medieval, and then my extensive study of folklore and mythology to develop my own associations. And it's not like I gave you multiple ways how there's things in the chart to prove what I just said. So that's more or less my go-to. I'm a skeptic at heart, more or less, and I like to make sure that I'm double sure. It's also probably the OCD thing. But I felt like that was just something interesting to share, and I didn't feel like writing that down, and that's going to be something that will be a concept that will be more elaborated in my book that I'm working on. So, and people keep asking about it. I don't know if, see, I'm a Gemini rising, and I'm really scattered all over the place, having, Saturn and Sagittarius. I don't know if I could actually just do a whole, I mean, probably could, but I don't know if I would want to do, like, a whole book that's just on one subject matter with astrology. Like, it might end up being, like, short essays and stuff. Like the, where is it? The Essays of Aristotle in Ethics kind of thing, where they're all, like, collaborated in together. Because I obviously have a huge, my huge focal is astropsychology, or incorporating astrological symbolism to understand the development that the person either doesn't know about and or to basically reveal things that they're not comfortable talking about. So it's taking the psychotherapy concept to a whole other level, because psychotherapy only works if your patient's willing to tell you what's going on, and that's assuming that they actually have a accurate recollection of what happened. So adding the astrological signatures into this mix can either help trigger memories when you discuss, like, what you're seeing. It can also, be beneficial for people who feel embarrassed or ashamed of things or don't want to get into graphic details, because I can sit there and depict the most gruesome event or influence in somebody, a trauma signature. And because I don't know the actual details of what transpired, I can explain the scenario, and they can go ahead and just, acknowledge that what I said is true, and they don't have to tell me the details of who did what or what happened and this and that to feel like they're vulnerable or uncomfortable. And we can still constructively talk about solutions without necessarily revealing and getting too intimate with things they don't want to talk about. That's the benefit with that as well. So adding astrology to psychotherapy is just an additional tool. And when I say adding astrology, I learned, I kind of, I'm self-taught, but I was originally pursuing a degree in psychology, but I decided not to with the way that the American Association with Psychology is going and everything, and the new Diagnostic Statistical Manual. I don't want to be a part of that, and I'm against the pharmacology bullcrap. But so I incorporate astrological associations with the psychology theories that I know. And that's essentially what Carl Jung did, and it's something that needs to be done. And I also really hope that maybe people understand that there is, some value to, past methodology. This is my personal advice. If you ever want to be an expert at your craft, or be the best, or, just you want to aspire to be something, look at the, study or research the history of that profession or vocation or, whatever, and determine when was the peak of its most, the peak of it, when it was most effective, when the methodology was foolproof, and there was a continuous growth of success. Replicate those, what those people did in that time frame, and you'll have the best thing. All I have to say, the fact that our years, our calendar months, our holidays, our the way that we track our clocks, and the way that we predict our weather with the Farmer's Almanac, and the way that you can predict medical, predispositions for medical conditions with medical astrology. Clearly, if all those things are even still adopted into, modern methodology today, regardless if people want to admit it or not, they were doing something really right back in the medieval times. So that is the route that I've decided to go. And yeah, that's also why I besides the fact that I'm, a maverick and I'm a shit starter, why I overemphasize on malefics still being a thing, because people don't understand clearly what malefic means. And I really urge people to go out and get a dictionary, especially while you can still get one, because I've seen a lot of them on clearance when I have bought some. I have so many. Just sometimes, just rechecking and looking a word up that you're using, and just knowing the synonyms and associations and everything like that could do wonders. You could realize that you're overlooking or misunderstanding something, like this. That Saturn and Mars are still malefic to this day, and I don't care what anyone says. And in fact, eclipses are also malefic. And the funny thing is that there's a correlation with, the Takata experiments that was a scientist in Japan in 1938. He proved that when you're extracting blood samples, that extracting the protein in the blood, the process in which the extraction happens is completely determined and altered on eclipses and magnetic storms. So eclipses are affecting blood, affecting your blood pressure, affecting the hormones and the protein in your blood when they happen. Mars also being associated as a malefic is directly affecting with your blood. Do you see this commonality here? Clearly the ancients knew a lot more about some things that we just clearly can't get. And we're too busy trying to physically prove it and see the tangible evidence in front of our faces to appreciate and to either debunk or prove, validate some of the ancients' philosophies. And that's very depressing. Because in this day and age, in modern society, people actually think that we're evolved more and that we're more intelligent now than we were then, and that is totally wrong. Absolutely wrong. But yeah, that's all I'm going to rant now. I'm going to stop before this turns into an hour. But yeah, I'm still working on my book, and if you have any questions, feel free. And if anybody likes this, then I can, periodically, just when I'm reading some manuscripts, just pull out my webcam and talk about stuff. I just don't know if there's anybody that's actually interested in it.
Hello, is there someone there who cares for God-forsaken souls and God-forsaken man? Is there someone there who cares?